The house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the sharp, hollow silence that made Morris feel like a guest in his own home. He stood in the doorway of his study, jacket slung over one arm, staring at the glow of the street lamps bleeding through the blinds. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked with mechanical certainty, but in his chest, nothing felt certain anymore. On his desk lay the contract that could define his career, the Madison Avenue property deal. 37 years of work, of sacrifice, of late nights spent chasing numbers and opportunities, all leading here. But his hands wouldn't move. The pen stayed capped. He heard footsteps, light, careful ones. Martha's. She was humming again, that same tune she used whenever she wanted to soften his mood, like an actress rehearsing a role. It had once been comforting. Tonight it sounded rehearsed. "Morris," she called from the kitchen. "I set out dinner. Don't let it get cold." Dinner. The ritual of normalcy. He almost smiled at the cruelty of it. He loosened his tie, walked past the framed photographs lining the hallway. Ruby's graduation. Their 25th anniversary. Vacations where smiles were frozen for the camera but felt real back then. He stopped at one photo. Martha, younger, laughing on a pier in the summer sun. His chest tightened. That was the woman he had married. That was the woman he believed in. Now he wasn't so sure. At the table, Martha poured wine into crystal glasses. Her eyes caught the chandelier light, green and familiar. But when she smiled, Morris noticed something small. A flicker, a hesitation. Like she was waiting to see if he'd noticed a secret she wasn't ready to reveal. He sat. The roast chicken smelled of rosemary, his favorite, but he felt no hunger. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "Long day. Longest in a while," he answered. His voice sounded too even, too practiced. He wanted to ask her where she had really been that afternoon. Wanted to demand why the credit card charges didn't match the stories about yoga classes. Wanted to say he noticed the perfume on her blouse last week wasn't hers. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he lifted his glass. The wine swirled dark and heavy. "To us," he murmured. Martha's smile widened, relief flashing behind it. She clinked her glass against his, and in that single sound, Morris heard the weight of 3 decades. The trust built, the love promised, and the fragile thread of loyalty stretched thin as glass. He drank. The liquid burned down his throat. Across the table, Martha asked about the Madison deal, her tone almost casual. But Morris watched her too closely now, and he saw it. The way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass when he mentioned the numbers, the profits, the timing. It was subtle, but it was enough. And in that moment he knew. Something was being planned. Something that would either break them forever or give him the chance to fight back. Later that night, Morris sat in the bedroom's half-light, watching the silhouette of his wife as she brushed her hair before the mirror. 37 years of marriage should have made this scene ordinary, comforting, even. But tonight, each stroke of the brush sounded like a clock ticking toward something inevitable. Martha hummed again. The same tune from dinner. It was meant to soothe, to mask silence with familiarity. Yet to Morris, it only amplified the distance between them. "You're restless," she said, catching his reflection in the mirror. "You've been pacing all evening." "I've got a lot on my mind," he replied. His voice was level, though inside, suspicion and dread churned like storm clouds. She set the brush down, turning to him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The Madison deal?" "Among other things." Her gaze lingered a second too long before she reached for her night cream, a routine gesture that suddenly felt staged. Morris wondered how many of her smiles, her reassurances, her gentle touches had been rehearsed. He remembered Ruby at 16, asking her mother why Dad was always at the office. Martha had laughed, saying, "Because your father loves us enough to build something lasting." Back then, he had believed it too. Now, he wasn't sure whether that love had become a weapon she could turn against him. The lamp clicked off, leaving only the glow from the street outside. Martha slid into bed, her breathing soon settling into the rhythm of sleep. Morris remained awake, staring at the ceiling. The signs replayed in his mind like fragments of a puzzle. The jewelry she claimed was on sale, but which bore the mark of Cartier. The spa charges that didn't match her old routines. The careful way she asked about his deals, his accounts, his retirement planning. And above all, that flicker in her eyes when he toasted to us. It wasn't just paranoia. Something was happening. Something dangerous. At 2 a.m., he rose quietly and walked to his study. The mahogany desk smelled faintly of paper and ink, grounding him as he pulled out financial statements, receipts, and credit card records. He spread them across the desk like evidence in a case. Numbers told stories, and these numbers whispered betrayal. $3,000 at the Plaza Hotel. Twice in a single week. Spa charges tagged in Midtown, far from the yoga studio she mentioned. A pattern began to emerge, chilling and deliberate. His phone buzzed, an email reminder about tomorrow's call with Johnson, the investor eager to close the Madison Avenue deal. Millions of dollars were at stake, which meant millions of reasons for Martha to be calculating something behind his back. Morris rubbed his temples. Trust was crumbling, replaced by the cold logic of business instincts honed over decades. Deals were about leverage, and somewhere Martha had decided she wanted hers. The thought pierced deeper than anger. She wasn't just deceiving him. She was preparing to negotiate against him. In the silence of his study, Morris made a quiet vow. Whatever was happening, he wouldn't be blindsided. Not by Martha. Not by anyone. And certainly not after 37 years of building a life he refused to let someone else dismantle. The morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that promised rain but refused to deliver. Morris moved through his routine like a man rehearsing someone else's life. Coffee, headlines, a glance at the contract on his desk. But his thoughts were locked on Martha. She was in the kitchen, humming again, her phone face down on the counter as she whisked eggs. Morris noticed the way she glanced at it every few seconds, as if expecting a pulse of light, a vibration, a secret only she could hear. Then it happened. A buzz, a glow. 1 second too long before she reached for it. Morris's instincts, sharpened from decades of business deals, made him act. "I'll grab it," he said quickly, moving before she could. He lifted the phone, pretending casual ease. "Might be Ruby." Martha froze, spatula midair. "It's probably nothing." But on the screen, Morris saw a name. Not Ruby. Not a sister. Not anyone in their family contacts. Dylan, his son-in-law. A preview of the message hovered in the notification bar. "He'll never see it coming. Just keep everything quiet until after the closing." For a moment, the room tilted. The sound of the whisk, the smell of eggs, the light through the window, all of it blurred into static. Morris's hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles whitened. "Who's Dylan texting you about?" His voice was low, controlled, but threaded with steel. Martha's eyes flickered. Fear, calculation, then a soft smile, like someone flipping through masks. "Oh, he's been helping me with some legal paperwork. You know how complicated things get with taxes. Too smooth, too quick." Morris placed the phone on the counter with deliberate calm, though inside he felt a rush of fire. He had built empires, negotiated with sharks, stared down competitors who would bankrupt him without blinking. But never had betrayal cut this close to bone. He wanted to explode, to demand answers, to throw every suspicion into her face. But something in him shifted at that moment. Business instincts again. Information was power, and power was never wasted on impulse. "Taxes," he echoed, nodding slowly. "Of course." Martha relaxed, turning back to the pan. She thought she had escaped. But Morris wasn't the same man who walked into the kitchen that morning. He had crossed an invisible line. As he sat at the table, he studied her in silence. The precise way she plated the eggs, the ease with which she resumed humming. Every gesture felt like theater. And he realized with brutal clarity that he wasn't sitting across from a partner anymore. He was sitting across from an opponent. The phone buzzed again. This time, Morris didn't move. He just watched Martha's hand dart toward it, protective, secretive. And in that instant, he knew the truth. Whatever Dylan and Martha were planning, it wasn't just betrayal. It was war. and Morris had just decided he was ready to fight. The city lights blurred against the rain-streaked cafe window. Morris sat in the corner booth, his suit immaculate, but his shoulders weighted with 37 years of memories turned fragile. He stirred his coffee without tasting it, staring at the swirl of cream dissolving into black. Across from him, Ruby leaned forward, her teacher's bag pushed aside, eyes narrowing with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Dad," she whispered, "are you saying Mom is involved with Dylan?" Morris exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. He slid his phone across the table, screen open to the captured message. "He'll never see it coming. Just keep everything quiet until after the closing." Ruby's hand covered her mouth. She read it once, twice, as though the words might change if she stared long enough. No, her voice cracked. Dylan wouldn't, he couldn't. But then her eyes clouded, and something in her hardened. The late nights, the unexplained calls. He said it was corporate cases. Morris studied her carefully. His daughter, the one he had walked to kindergarten, the one who cried on his shoulder when she failed her driver's test, the one whose wedding toast he had given with tears in his eyes, was now seeing her world tilt, just as his had. "I wanted to tell you sooner," he said quietly. "But I had to be sure. I've seen enough to know this isn't paranoia." Ruby's hands trembled as she gripped her mug. "If this is true, they're not just betraying you. They're betraying me." Silence stretched between them, filled with the muted clatter of dishes and the hiss of the espresso machine. Then Ruby lifted her gaze, steel replacing shock. "So what do we do?" Morris almost smiled through the ache in his chest. There it was, the resolve he had hoped for, the fire he once feared she hadn't inherited. "We wait," he said. "We gather everything. If they want to play this like a transaction, we'll treat it like one. Evidence, timing, strategy." Ruby's lips tightened. "And when we're ready, then," Morris said, leaning in, his voice low and certain, "we show them they underestimated the wrong family." For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to strength return. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. Ruby sat back, her expression torn between grief and determination. "I loved him, Dad. I defended him." She shook her head, blinking hard. "And Mom, I thought she'd always be my example of loyalty." Morris reached across the table, taking her hand. His voice softened. "They've already broken what they had. But you and I were still standing." Ruby nodded, tears threatening but refusing to fall. "Then we stand together." Outside, thunder rolled over Manhattan, shaking the glass. Morris glanced at the storm, then back at his daughter. He could feel the climax drawing nearer, like the moment before a deal closed, when all the risk, all the fear, balanced on the edge of decision. "Ruby," he said, his grip firm on her hand, "this isn't just about money. It's about everything we built. And I won't let them take that away." Her eyes shone now, fierce and unwavering. "Neither will I." The storm broke outside, rain hammering against the city, as father and daughter silently prepared for the war their family had become. The dining room glowed with candlelight, polished crystal glinting under the chandelier. To any outsider, it looked like a celebration. A family reunited around fine china and Martha's roasted chicken. But Morris knew it was a stage, and tonight, the masks would shatter. Martha laughed lightly at something Dylan said, her hand resting too casually near his on the tablecloth. Ruby sat stiff beside her husband, her fork untouched, eyes darting between them like a witness preparing for testimony. Morris raised his glass. "To family," he said, voice steady but carrying an undercurrent that only Ruby caught. She didn't move. Dylan clinked his glass confidently. Martha smiled too brightly. The sound of crystal meeting crystal was the signal. Morris set down his wine and reached beneath his chair. From a leather portfolio, he withdrew a stack of envelopes, thick with papers. He placed one in front of Martha, one in front of Dylan. "Dessert," he said softly. "Something sweet, though it may not taste that way." Martha frowned, her hand faltering over her fork. Dylan gave a skeptical smile, sliding the envelope closer. "What's this?" "Open it." They obeyed. The rustle of paper filled the silence as photographs, receipts, and transcripts spilled across the white linen. Martha's breath hitched. A photo of her entwined with another man outside the plaza. Dylan's jaw clenched as he saw his own handwriting, copies of legal drafts he thought were hidden. Ruby broke the silence. Her voice was sharp, trembling not with fear but with rage. "How long, Dylan? How long were you planning to rob my father while sleeping in my bed?" Dylan's face paled. "Ruby, listen." "No," she snapped, slamming her hand against the table. The glasses rattled. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare say my name like you still have the right." Martha reached for Morris, tears springing to her eyes. "I can explain. I was lonely, afraid you'd leave me with nothing." "Stop!" Morris's voice was cold steel. He pushed another photo toward her, the one outside Cartier, her hand in another man's. "You didn't plan to be left with nothing. You planned to take everything. With him. And with Dylan." The weight of 37 years pressed into the silence. Martha's shoulders shook, but Morris saw no wife anymore. Only a stranger who had rehearsed love like a performance. Dylan rose suddenly, fists clenched. "This isn't legal. You can't." Ruby stood too, her palm striking his face with a crack that split the night. He staggered, eyes wide. Not from the pain but from the betrayal he hadn't expected. From her. "You planned to destroy my father," she said, her voice shaking. "And you thought I'd stand by you? You don't know me at all." The room vibrated with silence, broken only by the storm outside battering against the windows. Morris leaned forward, his gaze locked on both of them. "You wanted leverage. You wanted control. But tonight you lost both. Everything you thought you hid, I've already secured it. Legally. Permanently." Martha's sob caught in her throat. Dylan's composure collapsed into rage. Ruby's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall, her hand finding her father's across the wreckage of papers and photographs. And in that moment, father and daughter united, betrayers exposed, the family that once was ended. But something stronger, though born in pain, took its place. The courtroom was cold in its precision. Oak panels, heavy silence, the shuffle of papers that decided fates. Morris sat at the plaintiff's table, back straight, jaw set. To anyone watching, he looked like a businessman calmly pursuing justice. But inside, it felt like a funeral, 37 years of vows being lowered into the ground. Across from him, Martha sat diminished, her green eyes swollen from sleepless nights. Dylan was there too, stripped of his sharp suit confidence, his tie askew, hands restless as though searching for an exit that didn't exist. The judge's voice cut through the air like a blade. Evidence admitted, photographs displayed, financial records laid bare. Words like infidelity, conspiracy, breach of trust hung heavy, each one another nail in the coffin of the life Morris once thought unshakable. Ruby sat behind him in the gallery. When he turned, just slightly, she gave a small nod, steady, unwavering. In that nod, Morris found strength. The ruling came swift, merciless. Assets awarded. Business secured. Martha to receive little more than the dignity of survival. Dylan referred for disciplinary action, his career teetering on the edge of ruin. The gavel fell, a sound like finality itself. When it was over, Martha didn't look at him. She gathered her things with trembling hands, a woman suddenly aged by the weight of her choices. Dylan stormed out first, muttering curses no one cared to hear. Morris remained seated until the room thinned, until only Ruby lingered. She touched his shoulder. "It's finished, Dad." He looked at her, really looked. His daughter. Not the little girl in school plays, not the bride walking down the aisle, but a woman forged in fire. Stronger now, harder, but still his. "Finished," he repeated. The word felt strange, hollow, and full all at once. Outside, Manhattan carried on, oblivious. Taxis blared. Crowds hurried. Life surged forward. But for Morris, time slowed. He stepped into the sunlight with Ruby at his side, and for the first time in months, he breathed without the weight of betrayal crushing his chest. They walked in silence for a while, their footsteps echoing against the courthouse steps. Finally, Ruby broke it. Do you regret it? Exposing everything. He thought about the photographs, the lies, the nights he had doubted his own instincts. He thought about Martha's face at the dinner table, caught between guilt and defiance. He thought about Dylan's smugness collapsing into desperation. No, he said quietly. What I regret is how long I trusted shadows. Ruby slipped her arm through his. Then let's stop walking in shadows. They moved together down the crowded avenue, father and daughter bound not by the wreckage behind them, but by the fragile, fierce loyalty that had survived. At a crosswalk, Morris paused, staring at the city spread out before them. Tall, unyielding, alive. 37 years, he murmured. And it all comes down to who you can still look in the eye when the storm passes. Ruby met his gaze. And who still stands beside you. The light turned green. They stepped forward, leaving behind a marriage buried by betrayal, carrying with them something rarer, truth, sharpened by pain, but unbreakable. And as they crossed, Morris realized the final cruelty and the final gift of betrayal. It destroys what was false, and leaves you only what is real. Our 7.